Mariam closed her eyes and counted to 10. The smell of old books and ink filled the basement archive of the city planning department, a job she had taken to stay close to maps, even if it meant being far from the life she once dreamed of. At 31, Mariam Bari was a certified urban geographer with a degree from Oxford. Fluent in Arabic, French, Swahili, and Spanish, she had designed transit maps for developing cities as part of her thesis. But here, in her hometown of Luleå, a cold, coastal Scandinavian city, she was reduced to cataloging old city maps in a poorly lit archive, in a department where she was the only black woman and where her colleagues still pretended not to hear her name correctly. Mary, they would say, even though her email signature clearly said Mariam. One had once joked if her family had come on a boat. Another once whispered, "You're very articulate." She had laughed then, quietly, because she needed the job. A knock echoed on the rusted door of the archive. "Ms. Bari," said a voice she didn't recognize. "You're needed upstairs, director's office." That was unusual. Mariam hadn't seen the director in 2 years. Her direct supervisor barely acknowledged her existence, except when barking orders or asking for tea at meetings. With hesitant steps, she followed the young intern to the top floor, where the hallway walls were lined with modern art and fresh orchids, and the carpet was so thick it swallowed footsteps. The door opened before she could knock. Inside stood 3 people: the director himself, a tall man in a trench coat with a briefcase, and a woman dressed like a UN envoy. "Mariam Bahri," the woman said warmly, extending her hand. "Deputy Commissioner Edda Jonsson from the Infrastructure Ministry. This is Eric, from the European Commission." Mariam nodded slowly. "Yes?" "You speak Arabic, French, and Swahili, correct?" Eric asked, flipping through a folder. "And you wrote a dissertation on outdated urban maps and their impact on displaced communities in war-torn regions." Again, she nodded. "There's a town, Nordby," Edda explained, "where a land dispute has frozen an EU-funded transit project. We need someone neutral to evaluate the mapping records. Someone quiet. Someone with no stake." "Why me?" Mariam asked cautiously. Edda paused. "Because you're overqualified, underutilized, and invisible to the men who forged those maps. They won't see you coming." Mariam blinked. Her fingers twitched with both suspicion and a flicker of hope. 2 days later, Mariam arrived in the fog-bound shell of Nordby, a once industrial town gutted by privatization and rising nationalist sentiment. Murals on the train station wall bore graffiti. "Real Swedes first." She pulled her coat tighter. A shopkeeper sneered as she asked for directions. The air was sharp, but the stairs were sharper. Her assignment was clear: verify the authenticity of a 1937 map that allegedly gave a wealthy family private ownership of riverside land meant for public transport expansion. In the municipal archive, she combed through moldy documents, crumbling ledgers, and brittle blueprints. After 2 days, she found the map, and knew instantly it was a fake. The boundary lines were wrong. The scale bar was inconsistent with the region's 1930s standards. The symbols used were adopted only decades later. And the forger's name? Eric Lindstrom, the very official who had sent for her. She copied every page, photographed every inconsistency. But something deeper stirred in her. The realization that this wasn't just administrative corruption. It was deliberate erasure. Back in Luleå, Mariam arranged a quiet meeting with Commissioner Edda. "You knew," Mariam said. "I had my suspicions," Edda replied. "But I needed someone who could expose it. Someone whose honesty no one could question." Mariam bristled. "Or someone you could use because no one notices her." "I used your brilliance," Edda said gently. "The world tried to use your silence." That night, Mariam received an encrypted file from Edda's office. Internal investigations into the ministry's land fraud scandals. She scrolled through page after page, forged maps, offshore payments, and a disturbing pattern. Land was being systematically stripped from poor, or immigrant-heavy communities and redirected to shell companies linked to nationalist funders. Dozens of towns, thousands of lives. The public justification? Redevelopment of underutilized zones. The truth? Legalized racial exclusion. And now she held the evidence. A week later, Mariam stood before a government tribunal in Stockholm. Cameras clicked, but she ignored them. She didn't speak as a victim. She spoke as a cartographer. "This map," she said, pointing to the 1937 document, was forged using post-war symbology, not adopted, until 1949. The township legend includes Swahili, which was only added after East African refugees resettled in 1983. This is not a historical record. It's a modern manipulation designed to erase a community. Eric sat in the back of the room, expressionless, but Mariam could see it, his jaw twitching. Her testimony triggered the suspension of the Nordby Transit Project and prompted a nationwide audit of historical land ownership. The media, slow at first, began to dig. 2 nights later, a note was taped to her apartment door. "Go back where you came from. Your lies will cost real people their homes." That night, she didn't cry. Instead, she wrote a proposal. By dawn, Mariam had drafted the framework for the Map Equity Council, an independent body to investigate racial bias in national cartography and land allocation systems. 3 months later, it was approved. What began with one forged map turned into a cascade of discoveries. Mariam's council uncovered entire neighborhoods, low-income districts, refugee camps, and black-owned businesses that had been conveniently left off the map to block them from services, infrastructure, and legal protections. Meanwhile, Eric Lindstrom was arrested under charges of land laundering and fraud. His trial made headlines. Mariam's name, curiously, was often omitted. But inside ministries and boardrooms, the silence around her was finally cracking. Interns whispered her name with reverence. Journalists requested interviews. Her inbox overflowed. Still, she kept working. One rainy afternoon, Mariam received a letter in a cream envelope stamped with the Oxford crest. "We have followed your work with the Council. Your findings are reshaping the ethical framework of global cartography. We are proud to offer you a visiting professorship in critical map studies." She read it twice. 6 years ago, her former boss laughed at her accent, said clients wouldn't feel comfortable if she handled the presentation. That same man had now been demoted, his department folded under the council's oversight. In the summer, Mariam stood on a hill in Nairobi, overlooking a lush valley where refugee villages once stood. Her team included women from Ghana, Lebanon, Sweden, and Colombia, all multilingual, brilliant, and previously overlooked in their countries. "This river," a young Kenyan intern said, "used to be a border." "Now it's just a road," Mariam replied. They shared a quiet laugh. Behind them, a plaque was being unveiled by local officials. "In honor of those who redrew our history with courage, not conquest." A year after the Nordby scandal, the Scandinavian Urban Planning Association held its annual summit. The keynote speaker was Dr. Mariam Bahri. She didn't talk about topography or zoning. She talked about doors that stayed closed, resumes that vanished, interviews that ended with polite thank yous and never a call back. She told the room, "They used maps to erase us. We use them now to be seen." The auditorium stood in silence. Then the applause came, slow, then roaring. Outside the auditorium, a group of students waited for her, not for selfies, but for mentorship. Back in Nordby, the fraudulent map now sat in a glass case at a local museum, labeled "Fraudulent, Rejected, Exposed." And somewhere, Eric Lindstrom sat in a holding facility, awaiting sentencing. His empire built on lines and lies, undone by a woman he never saw coming.